Hello everyone, welcome to your Transmit Yourself weekly live show where we talk about topics related to fear of commitment so that you can create your own fulfilling relationship. My name is Javier Peñalba, your host, and today we'll be talking about 3 strategies for dealing with passive aggressiveness. We'll begin with a story of how this applied in my life in the past. So when I was younger, I remember how at the beginning of a relationship, especially with them, I would start doing anything that they wanted. So try to please them in almost any way. And that could include, for example, going to movies that I didn't want to go, going to restaurants that I didn't really like, or not expressing my opinion when I knew it went against their opinion. It felt in a way good because I was avoiding conflict and I was more likable to them. But then as time went on in the relationship, and I would somehow develop a pressure within me. Something grew within me that made me feel a bit angry. And I would stop these behaviors in which I was so pleasing to them, and I would maybe still please them, but reluctantly or in a bad mood, a little bit angry, and at times I would even do the opposite or simply disconnect and withdraw. So these are all typical things or typical symptoms of passive aggressiveness. And I'm just telling you a couple of symptoms based on my example, but there's many other things like, for example, being overly sarcastic or again, doing the opposite of what you're told or criticizing, complaining a lot, in a way is like taking out some frustration or something that's within you that maybe it's not being done in an aggressive way, but in a way that will not be perceived as mean directly to others, a little bit innocent, but still can affect others. So we'll be understanding a little bit about how this works, and I'll talk about 3 strategies that you can use in order to reduce this. And I just want to make sure that you know that this is something that affects a lot of people with fear of commitment, and this is one of the reasons why they can tend to disconnect, withdraw, and even avoid relationships because they don't want to go through this anymore. All right, so the tips, let's start with the first tip, which is to separate and understand the voices in your head that may be creating this passive aggressiveness. And I have separated this into 2 voices. What I mean by voices is aspects of your psyche or aspects of yourself. In this case, there can be aspects that are clashing against each other. That's what I'm calling a voice here. So the first voice that I identified is a victim voice. And it's that aspect of you that feels powerless, that feels at the mercy of the world or at the mercy of others, that cannot really express their opinion, and that pretty much cannot set their boundaries, has to quiet down their opinions because it's dangerous, right? Or because you don't want to be disliked. So this is the part, this victim voice is what adds the passive part of passive aggressiveness. It's the part that wants to be liked, the part that wants to be nice to others. This can come from the way that you were raised, maybe. Maybe you learned that telling your opinion to adults is actually not something that should be done because adults are always right, or that you should respect adults, for example. So pretty much giving priority to other people and leaving your needs aside. It can be any other, it doesn't have to be parents, it can be teachers, whoever, or whatever you learned from society that was interpreted in that way as you were growing up. So what ends up happening is that this victim voice quiets down what you really want, and that can create some frustration, some tension that we'll discuss in the second voice that I identified. But pretty much this voice, what it's doing is it has a purpose, right? It has had a purpose, otherwise it wouldn't be there. And the purpose has been to protect you from feeling guilt when you are maybe contradicting someone, or when you're doing something that some other people might not like. So in essence, protect you from the guilt of not being nice and from the discomfort that can come out of conflict. Because if you express yourself, there can also be some conflict. So this is that first voice. Then there's a second voice. I call it the fighter. It can be the knight, whatever you want to call it, right? But let's just separate those voices or aspects. And this fighter, what it wants is really to be heard, right? And it wants its needs to be fulfilled. It doesn't want to just quiet down like the victim does. And it creates that aggressive side of passive aggressiveness. So it tells you that your needs matter, and it wants to take control back of the situation, and to feel power, to feel authority, to feel respected. What happens then is that these two voices, they clash. On the one hand, the victim voice, it pretty much is saying, I want to be nice, I don't want to be aggressive, I don't want to be mean. And this other voice is saying, I want to be heard, I am important, and I need to show other people that I am important. So as these two voices are clashing, what ends up happening is that maybe you do what others want and you say yes when you mean no. But then you do it in a way that you actually are doing it reluctantly, or are feeling bad. Or you can do in general things that you don't want, but with a very frowned, very serious face, or in a way that other people can tell that you're not enjoying yourself. So this is pretty much what happens. They have their purpose. Again, the purpose of this second voice of the fighter voice, again, is to feel a little bit of control, to feel some respect, and to feel some certainty again. Once you have learned to separate those voices as they arise when you're being passive aggressive, then the second tip that I have for you is to learn to state your needs. This is very important because this is pretty much the root of passive aggressiveness. Is that victim voice that learned that stating its needs is wrong. And when you learn that, you pretty much swallowed everything that was important for you. You lived at the expense pretty much of others. And then this other voice, this fighter voice, was developed in order somehow to compensate for that. But this conflict is not necessary anymore, especially when you learn to state, and to, well, not just to state, but first to differentiate and to determine what are your needs, and then to learn to state them. And this can involve facing conflict, for example. But this is something that you have to face, and the best way to face or to learn how to handle conflict is actually to face it with this knowledge that you have now, that you have maybe have had these patterns that are not helping you. Also with some self-love, loving yourself enough to want to change and to respect your own needs. And at the same time with some compassion for other people. It's not necessarily to simply state your rule or state how powerful you are because you're changing your mindset, something like that. That's not the purpose of what I'm saying. So you can add some compassion and simply go back to your peace. If you can do these things that I'm saying, stating your needs in an adult manner, in a peaceful way, then you can find a way to come to a solution or to something that's in between. Now, the third tip that I have is learning to come to terms with whatever you do. So this is not learning to state your needs, which was the step number 2 or the tip number 2. Again, doesn't mean that you will always get your way. Sometimes you can't. It happens in life, right? Maybe you have a boss, or you have a situation in which you simply cannot either state, or you cannot accomplish whatever it is that you want. And you have to come to terms to that and accept what's within your control and separate from what is not within your control. And now it's important to note that it's not what we do really that matters, but the stories that we tell ourselves about what we do that make us feel a certain way, that then creates this conflict or creates peace. So let me give an example for that. If you're asked, you have to study for a test or you're preparing yourself for something, right? And then your wife or your girlfriend asks you to go pick her up to school or wherever because she doesn't have a car that day. Then you could act in a very passive aggressive way and say, yes, I'll do it. But then you go very angry to do it. Yeah. And you go pick her up and you don't speak the whole way back. That's one way, because you were telling yourself maybe the story that they're not respecting you, but still you want to be nice. All the things that I said in the first step, right, in the separation of the voices. Then you can also come to terms with whatever it is by telling yourself another story, which it could be, well, she doesn't have a car. I'm her only choice at this point, and I love her, and she actually needs me at this moment. Maybe I can actually do this that I'm doing, studying or preparing myself. I can do that in an hour. So that way you come to terms just by telling yourself another story. You see, the first story is she's not respecting you. She doesn't respect your time. She doesn't leave you alone, whatever it is. Change the story into, it's important for her. I have the time, I have the car, I can do it, and I will just finish what I'm doing later. So learning to come to terms with whatever it is that you do will give you a lot of peace. And of course, if it's something that it's really something that you cannot do at that moment, then speak up. We go back to step number 2, or to the tip number 2, which is learning to determine and to state your needs. And you can say, well, honey, I cannot do it right now. I have this upcoming meeting, whatever it is, but we can find a solution, right? I have a friend that's around there. I can call him, whatever. But speaking up like adults and learning to avoid, not to avoid, but to face the potential of conflict, that is very powerful. It will give you a lot more peace, a lot more power back to you, and you'll feel how the aggressive part in general, just the passive aggressiveness will just go down a lot, because you'll be more yourself. All right, this has been it for today. I hope that you have enjoyed. Leave your comments. Let me know what you think about this. What's your experience with passive aggressiveness, and how can these tips help you? And I'll see you next time. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel, to like this video, and to share it with anyone that could benefit from it. See you soon. Thank you.